behalf of our program, I welcome all of you to the update in lung cancer management, whose program director is none other than Dr. Suresh Advani, who is Director of Medical Oncology at various hospitals across Mumbai, and he has also set up a wonderful multi-specialty hospital in his hometown. With these few words, may I request Dr. Advani to please welcome the audience and do the context setting. Over to you, Dr. Advani, as our program director. Dr. Advani, sir.
So you will have to unmute yourself, Dr. Advani.
Good evening, colleagues. I'm really, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to get together and have a update in the lung cancer management. And first of all, because tomorrow is the 15th August, I would like to congratulate all of everybody who is here for our National Day. And now we are going to, now we are going to discuss the management of the lung cancer, particularly with respect to the EGFR. As all of you know, that EGFR is present in 20 to 30% of the patients. And whenever the EGFR shows mutation, all of us feel happy, and now we can treat with the tablets. And of course, there's so much of the variation within the EGFR that I think it's good to discuss this in detail and see how we can optimize the treatment for every patient. And that is what is going to be a major program to be discussed today. So I'm sure we'll continue further. Dr. Parikh.
Sir, thank you very much. As you mentioned, EGFR TKIs are the cornerstones of how we should treat our patients with lung cancer. And so I would request Dr. Niranjan Prabhu to set the ball rolling with the first talk. His topic is role of sequencing of EGFR TKIs in non-small cell lung cancer. Over to you, Dr. Niranjan Prabhu. We are looking forward to your talk.
Very good evening, sir. First of all, it's a great privilege for me to share stage with such eminent speakers as well as prominent oncologists. So it's a very great pleasure for me, first of all. Myself, Dr. Niranjan from the Medical Affairs team of Boehringer Ingelheim. I am associated with Boehringer Ingelheim for the past 1 year, past 2 years. I completed my MD in pharmacology from Christian Medical College in the year 2019. And since then, I am associated with Boehringer Ingelheim in the Medical Affairs division for the past 2 years. With this brief introduction about me, I would like to kickstart the session with a very important talk in the management of lung cancer, or specifically EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer. A very important strategy, a very useful strategy, or we can say it's also, on the other hand, it's a very controversial strategy, I must say. So today, I will try to clarify certain myths that are associated with a very important study, that is GEOTAG, the study design associated with it, and several other studies which have shown similar results like GEOTAG. So with this, without wasting much time, I would like to proceed with my talk. So whenever we say EGFR mutations, so we have 3 generations of tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So a lot of talks on these molecules, the efficacies, the kinetics have been already done. But very importantly, what is not done is, there is a comparison between 2nd generation and 1st generation. There was also certain clinical trials that have compared 3rd generation and the 1st generation. But very importantly, the 3rd generation was never compared against any of the 1st generation TKI. Sorry, any of the 2nd generation TKI. So when 1st generation was introduced, it was compared against chemotherapy. When 2nd generation was introduced, it was compared against the 1st generation TKI. But when 3rd generation was introduced, it was straight away compared against 1st generation TKI without being compared against the existing second generation TKIs. So this particular data is lagging. Hence, this again keeps the first line treatment of choice under debate. So as I told, we have several options. The first option would be to comfortably start a patient on osimertinib and wait till he progresses, then go with chemotherapy, or just take a risk by starting a first generation or a second generation TKI. There is a very high chance that the patient would become T790M positive, where once again we can reintroduce another TKI, that is osimertinib. So here, if we go by sequencing, we can add 2 tyrosine kinase inhibitors in the treatment paradigm of the patient. But the last option, that is tyrosine kinase inhibitor plus a chemotherapy, which is also an upcoming choice among most of the oncologists. But the issue is what after this particular once the patient progresses after this particular regimen. So with these doubts in mind, we really want to start with osimertinib in the first line, because there are a lot of dearths in the data. First thing is, osimertinib was compared against first generation and not a second generation drug. And most importantly, the post osimertinib, there is an issue. So here, most of the time, it's a non-targetable mutation. Like for example, in FLORA trial itself, MET amplification was seen in 15% of the patient, and that was the most common one, and it is still non-targetable. And this will lead to the most common second line option, post osimertinib, leading to chemotherapy. So if we start with osimertinib, maybe the patient will do very well till the first line, but once the patient progresses, he will have to ultimately take chemotherapy most often. Another problem is the overall survival benefit. If you look at the Asian population, it was not very much evident, or it was not evident at all in FLORA trial. The hazard ratio was almost close to 1. And if you look at the overall population also, the hazard ratio was around 0.8. If you look at the confidence interval, the upper margin of the confidence interval was almost 1. That is 0. Followed by 2 9s and then 7. So that is almost close to 1, which means even if 2 or 3 more patients or 4 more patients, if they have done well in the comparator arm, the trial could have been negative for the overall survival. So with these problems in mind, we can not say that osimertinib is the best choice or the only choice in the EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer. And this is very much evident from FLORA trial once again. So here, if you see on the left-hand side of the graph, so this is the osimertinib, and then this is the second line options in following osimertinib. So you can see 2/3 of the patient received cytotoxic chemotherapy, whereas in the other arm, that is in the comparator arm, that is those patients who received first generation TKI, you can see only 22% of the patients received cytotoxic chemotherapy, and around 50% of the patients received osimertinib in the second line. So with this, very few number of patients received cytotoxic chemotherapy, hence the quality of life in those patients would have been much better. So what are the other options that are available? So to understand this, we again go back to the drawing board, to the basics of lung cancer, the tumor clonality, what is tumor enrichment, etc. So I would like to take you through these points before we go into GEOTAC study. So we know that the lung cancer tumor is highly heterogeneous. So we have truncal mutations which appear in the first time. So at the time of diagnosis, it is very easy to identify these truncal mutations, and most of the targeted options are directed towards these truncal mutations. But eventually, once the patient progresses, there are branchial mutations, multiple branchial mutations, in fact. So if you see the truncal mutation is A, but branchial mutations can be B, C, D, E, F. So once the patient is progressing continuously, there will be several other mutations. So the whole tumor will become completely heterogeneous. So it becomes very difficult to use a targeted therapy to treat in those patients. So this is the major problem with lung cancer, and that is the reason the survival is also very less in these patients. So one of our hypothesis to use a second generation TKI is this. So we know that a first generation, if you look at the upper half of the image, so if you look at the tyrosine kinase used here, so this is either erlotinib or gefitinib, a first generation TKI, which do not have a broader TKI activity. When such a tumor is exposed to these kind of first generation TKI, the tumor remains heterogeneous. But when the same tumor is further exposed to a third generation TKI like osimertinib, the tumor further becomes more and more heterogeneous and becomes very difficult to treat in the near future. When the same tumor is exposed to a second generation TKI with a broader, which has a broader range of activity, which means it right from all the 3 ERBB receptors are actually blocked by afatinib or any other second generation TKI, that is dacometinib for that matter. if you look at the T790M enrichment, the yellow cells you can see actually are the T790M mutated cells. So on the top one, you can see the tumor is still heterogeneous, but in the bottom, the one treated with afatinib, you can see the homogeneity has developed towards enrichment of T790M. And when osimertinib is treated in such patient, the response to osimertinib is also good, and there is a longer duration of treatment that can be possible with the osimertinib. So this is the hypothesis. So it did not actually remain as hypothesis alone. So there is preclinical data which actually supports this statement. So this is the preclinical evidence which we have. So here on the left-hand side, you can see this is actually was done on a murine cell, BAF3 cells. So where the T790M concentration was actually evaluated after them being exposed to either a first generation TKI or afatinib. So here if you see the T790M concentration, there was a significant difference between the T790M concentration across afatinib treated cells versus first generation TKI treated cells. So in afatinib treated cells, the T790M incidence was more and the tumor was more enriched with T790M mutations. Why this happened? It is mainly because of the broader range of activity of afatinib. So what afatinib does is it prevents the growth of other clones and it promotes the cell to grow towards T790M positivity, so that it basically gets the playground ready for the osimertinib to act better in the lung cancer. And this did not remain as a preclinical evidence again. It was also evident in a clinical study. So this was a retrospective multi-center single country study which was done in Japan. So the patients were subclassified into group 1 and group 2. Group 1 was those patients who received first generation TKI and then osimertinib. Group 2 were the patients who received afatinib and then osimertinib. So here the study was basically to compare the response of osimertinib between group 1 and group 2. That is, in those patients who received first generation TKI and then osimertinib versus those patients who received afatinib and then osimertinib. So here if you see, the response rate in first generation TKI was 53% and it was 82% with afatinib. That is, the response of osimertinib was much better in the afatinib pre-treated group, both in terms of the response rate as well as in the terms of disease control rate. Even if you look at the median PFS, the progression-free survival was longer for osimertinib in afatinib arm compared to osimertinib in the first generation TKI arm. It was 17 versus 9.7. So this is again another clinical study which actually says that afatinib prior to osimertinib is much better option than a first generation TKI followed by osimertinib. So the main reason why we brought this up is the tumor basically is getting more and more homogeneous when we treat it with afatinib because it is going to get enriched with T790M, and we know very well that once the tumor is full of T790M, osimertinib is going to have a wonderful or a tremendous effect in terms of preventing further progression. Again, a very important point, that is resistant mechanism following first line treatment. So we need to keep this also in mind before we choose the first line option. So we very well know that once we give a first generation or a second generation TKI, most common mutation would be T790M. Whereas with osimertinib, most of the times it is going to be a non-targetable mutation, which is very difficult to use, very difficult to treat, and most of the time they end up giving chemotherapy. And again, one of the most spoken point is the incidence of T790M. So most of the doctors won't agree with me when I say the incidence of T790M is around 50% or 60% or 70%. They say it's we rarely see T790M following afatinib or first generation TKI. The main reason is the heterogeneity in the tumors. What we call it as spatiotemporal heterogeneity. So I have collected several studies actually which was published in the PubMed. So if you see, there are studies which says 34% is the incidence. There are studies which say 36% is the incidence of T790M. There are studies which say 50%. There are studies which to say 60, 70, or even 80 at times. So this kind of a heterogeneous results is what has been observed in detecting T790M. Why this is happening was actually the majority of the reason is the tumor heterogeneity. So here there is a very interesting study where the incidence of T790M detection actually has increased in the same set of patients upon repeated rebiopsies. So maybe in the first rebiopsy, they have missed identifying the T790M, but when the same patients underwent several rebiopsies, the detection rate of T790M or the probability of detection of T790M actually increased by several folds. So this study was actually evident for that. So this is a retrospective single center study once again, which evaluated the T790M detection rate in these patients. So roughly around 50 patients were actually recruited, out of which initially, when they underwent first rebiopsy, only 18 patients had T790M positive. So that is, when 50 patients underwent rebiopsy, only 18 patients had T790M positive in the first rebiopsy. But then when the same patients underwent several other rebiopsies for certain reasons, maybe from the different sites or from the same sites or from metastasis site or etc., from any point of time, at a different point of time, additional 22 patients showed T790M positive. So initially there were only 18 patients, but on several rebiopsy, additionally 22 patients showed T790M positive, which means in the first at the first point it was only 36%, but upon several repeated rebiopsy, the incidence increased up to 80%. So straight from 36% to 80% was the incidence of T790M mutation following first generation or a second generation tyrosine kinase inhibitors. Why this is happening? Why this is happening is because of the authors have actually hypothesized a concept called spatiotemporal heterogeneity. So what they say is the tumors, whatever the mutations are actually seen, it is not going to be homogeneously distributed. So maybe we are taking, maybe the tumor is actually divided into 4 or 5 or 10 or etc. And we are taking a chunk from a different site where that particular mutation might be missed, or we are taking from a different site where that particular mutation is more. So there is a high chance or a high probability to either include or miss out on those mutations while doing the molecular analysis. So, and also another hypothesis is clonal selection. Not every TKI behaves in the same way on every site of at every site of the tumor. Like for example, one particular TKI can have a differential effect inside the lung or outside the lung. The same TKI can behave in a different way in the liver metastasis or in the bone metastasis. So such clonal selections are very much possible with tyrosine kinase inhibitors, because of which the tumor will be completely heterogeneous from depending on site to site. Because of this, there can be a lot of heterogeneity and T790M can be missed. Hence, we have to be very careful while detecting these T790M in these particular patients. So this particular table actually highlights one more very important point. On repeated rebiopsy, out of 21 patients who had deletion 19, 20 patients turned out to be T790M positive, which is more than 95%. This clearly says that deletion 19 patients have a very high preponderance to become T790M positive when treated with first generation or a second generation TKI, giving more and more probability and possibility to introduce osimertinib. So whenever we find a patient with deletion 19, this adds on to the point that sequencing should be tried in these patients because the T790M incidence is very high in these patients. Now coming to the very important study, that is GEOTAG. So this one has been already discussed several times, so I will keep it very short. So the main primary objective of this particular study was to look at the time on treatment of afatinib followed by osimertinib in those patients who received first line afatinib, then become T790M positive. This was a real world study. Since it was a very difficult study to perform on a clinical trial, we went forward to conduct this as a real world evidence. So basically, this retrospectively taken those patients, recruited those patients who received first line afatinib, then become T790M positive, for which they received osimertinib. Only caveat here is the data collection. We will collect only those patients who were initiated on osimertinib 10 months prior. I will again reiterate, these were the patients who were initiated osimertinib 10 months prior. Patient need not continue on osimertinib for 10 months. Even if the patient has continued osimertinib for maybe 1 day or 1 month or 1 week, etc., that is fine if the recruitment or if the patient was initiated on osimertinib 10 months prior to the date of recruitment. For example, if I'm recruiting a patient today, that is in the month of August, the patient should have started on osimertinib at least in the month of October, the previous year. If the patient has taken only for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or 1 week, I will still recruit the patient just because of the fact that the initiation of osimertinib has taken place 10 months prior. Why we did this? Because we knew that the time on treatment for osimertinib in second line would be close to 10 months. So we wanted 10 full months of data with osimertinib so that the data will be more and more mature. This data was actually from AURA 3. where the osimertinib, the second line treatment with osimertinib was around 10 months. The PFS was around 10 months. Although there are a lot of criticism about GEOTAG saying that it is a real world evidence, it is not a clinical trial. Yes, we do agree it is not a clinical trial, but definitely we should not forget that real world evidences are very important because it will capture those data which are generally missed on a clinical trial. So here, similarly, that has happened in GEOTAG study as well, where most of the trials have a upper limit for age. GEOTAG did not have that. And we can see more than 1/3 of the patients were actually very old patients, more than 65 years. And there was no restrictions on initial doses. So there is a very strict protocol followed in clinical trial, but in general practice, it doesn't happen with any of the drugs that are available with us. So there are a lot of dose modifications, those low dose initiations, everything happen. And clinical trials do not give the exact efficacy of those particular low dose from those data. But GEOTAG actually recruited around 1/6 of the patient whose dose was actually, the afatinib dose was actually not the intended dose or the recommended dose. And not to forget, in general practice, more than 30-40% of patients are actually of poor performance status. So here, and they are generally excluded in a clinical trial, like only ECOG PS of 0 and 1 are predominantly included in the clinical trial. But in particular, in GEOTAG, around 15% of patients were actually having ECOG more than 2. And there were several measures to reduce the bias. So consecutive patients were recruited, patients with brain mets and ECOG performance status 2 was also included. There was no minimum cutoff on duration of afatinib or osimertinib use. So there are several criticisms saying that we have recruited in GEOTAG only those patients who responded to afatinib very well. But it's actually not the fact, because there was no minimum cutoff on the duration of afatinib or osimertinib usage. So the results in summary, if you look at the Asian population with deletion 19, these were the patients who responded very well. If you look at the time on treatment with TKI alone, it went up to 40 months. So deletion 19 in Asian population, the time on treatment went up to 40 months with just tyrosine kinase. The chemotherapy was pushed to 3 years actually, which generally is not the case in any lung cancer. And other groups as well responded very well. Importantly, patients with ECOG performance 2 also, they did quite good. The overall survival reached up to 32 months. The 2-year survival probability again was very high with Asian patients with deletion 19, was around 94%, and patients with brain mets did not respond that well with sequencing, though the overall survival reached up to 33 months. And very importantly, GEOTAG was not the only study which actually says afatinib in first line is better than first line osimertinib, although there was not a head-to-head comparison. So this was the first study of its kind, which actually compared first line osimertinib versus first line afatinib. This was all, it was a real world evidence actually, but it was done on quite a good number of patients. So 224 patients received afatinib, 326 patients received osimertinib here. If you look at the baseline characteristics, majority of the patients were actually having deletion 19, and some of the patients had L858R. And if you look at in afatinib arm, majority of the patients were having uncommon mutation. So uncommon mutation, still the best option is afatinib hands down. And this is again very much evident from this study also. So if you look at the results, the time to TKI discontinuation was actually similar between afatinib group and osimertinib group. So time to treat TKI discontinuation was similar, that is 18 and 20. So if you look at the p-value, it was not significant. But if you actually look at the overall survival was quite significant in the afatinib group. So it was around 36 months versus 25 months with osimertinib. Although there is a understanding that Asian patients did not respond that well to osimertinib, but afatinib has actually shown a statistically significant overall survival benefit compared to osimertinib in the first line. There are several other studies which actually supports sequencing. So if you look at Girard et al. On the left-hand side, these were the patients roughly around, there were around 300 plus patients in this particular study, where these patients were treated with first generation or a second generation TKI, followed by they received osimertinib. So median time on treatment in these patients was around 34 months. So just on TKI, we could keep these patients up to 3 years almost. And on the right-hand side, if you see, these were the patients who received afatinib followed by osimertinib. In those patients, the overall survival went up to 49 months, if you see, in Japan. Although Japanese patients respond in general very well to afatinib, but definitely other patients also would respond close to this value, although not so close to. So just to keep everything into perspective, with osimertinib, definitely one would get a very good PFS of around 19 months, which we got from FLORA. But most common option after that is chemotherapy. We should not forget that. But overall survival went up to 38 months in FLORA. But we should also remember that these patients were with good performance status, that is 0 and 1. So the chemo-free period in these patients, we could expect around 18 to 20 months. Whereas with afatinib and osimertinib, when these patients, when we start these patients on afatinib, there is a substantial patients who would become T790M positive, who would receive osimertinib. In these patients, a chemo-free period of around 27 to 28 months can be expected. After that only chemotherapy is actually introduced. So the chemotherapy duration is going to be smaller and the overall survival is close to starting osimertinib only in the first line. But we should not forget that these were the patients who also had ECOG performance status of 2 or more. That is poor performance status. When these patients were actually excluded from geotag, when we included ECOG performance status of 0 and 1 alone, the time on treatment went up to 30 months actually. So chemotherapy was pushed to 11 more months compared to osimertinib in the first line. So when we start the patients with afatinib, there's a substantial chance that they would become T790M positive, who would be initiated on osimertinib further. We can give these patients a 2.5 years of chemo-free period, which is the biggest advantage by doing sequencing, followed by chemotherapy, which will end up with a larger overall survival. So we can get a good chemo-free period as well as a longer overall survival with sequencing strategies. With this, I would like to conclude my talk, and I'm also ready to take questions towards the end of all the sessions. Thanks for the opportunity. Over to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Niranjan. You have really given a nice perspective of real world head-to-head comparison between osimertinib and afatinib, and the need to ensure that there is a chemo-free interval which is optimized by ideal sequencing. We now have a wonderful panel discussion which is moderated by none other than Dr. Ullas Batra. So welcome, Ullas. I will also introduce the panelists. Dr. Amit Verma, molecular oncologist from Delhi. Dr. Subhash Ranjan, who retired with the rank of equivalent of a brigadier from the Indian Navy, and he is a well-respected medical oncologist. Dr. Nurad Joseph, whom I've already introduced earlier. Dr. Arvind Krishnamurthy, surgical oncologist from Cancer Institute, Adyar. Dr. P.N. Mahapatra, senior medical oncologist from Orissa. Dr. Kaustubh Talpatra, radiation oncologist from Mumbai, and Dr. M.V. Chandrakant, medical oncologist from Kolkata. Over to you, Ullas. And we are looking forward to a very lively panel discussion.
Thank you for the kind words. And I was asked to moderate a discussion on management of lung cancer. And my first reactions, when I first saw this topic about panel discussion on management of lung cancer was half an hour lung cancer management. It was almost like Gabbar Singh saying, bahut nainsafi hai. I think we can write textbooks and textbooks and textbooks on this and still not really go anywhere actually. And then my subsequent reactions was when I saw Dr. Advani's face on as a program director. And I said, हाँ सर के लिए तो बहुत आसान है, जितना काम हम पूरे लाइफ टाइम में करते हैं सर ने उतना आधे घंटे में करना होगा. So I will try to do justice to this topic. So I will try to discuss. I wanted to put Dr. Purvesh Parikh's photograph also, but I said, 2 titans in this, I will get rocked between this thing there. So I put only Dr. Advani's photograph on that. So I did not even actually see that there will be one radiation and one surgical oncologist over there. Lung cancer panels, lung cancer panel one, this is the only branch I would say in which the medical oncologists really call the shots everywhere. My surgeon says, one patient also gets, last se pooch lo jaake. So I'm very happy as a medical oncologist, although it's sad that we all have a stage 4 lung cancer disease, but still it's good to be a predominantly medical domain of disease. Let's start. So let's start with our typical, I just made some questions over here. So let me start my questions with our guest from overseas, Dr. Nuraj Joseph. Dr. Joseph, how do you do a biomarker testing in your clinical practice? I'm talking about stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer patient comes to you. How do you, how do you start? Dr. Joseph?
Dr. Joseph, you have to unmute yourself. Dr. Nuraj Joseph.
Okay, doesn't make a difference. Let me go to the, let me just do something else. Let me go to Dr. Arvind Krishnamurthy. So Dr. Krishnamurthy, tell me, your medical oncologist, you know, they want all those things and all things over there. What in your opinion is the value of biomarker testing? How much do you think is enough?
Thank you for having me in this panel. I know it's this typical medical oncology domain, but I must tell you that it's because 85 to 90% are all stage 4. And I think when it comes to the earlier stage, I think it's again a multidisciplinary thing.
I will try to dispel that truth also, Dr. Krishnamurthy.
No, I know. I think even in the recent ASCO, we are seeing more and more about immune checkpoint checkpoint inhibitors being used in the neoadjuvant setting as well. So I think we are open to it. As oncologists, I must say that we are committed to give the best for our patients. I know it's the standard of care to do these molecular markers in advanced stage 4 cancers, but it's being increasingly seen, especially in early stage cancers, also with regards to adjuvant treatment. And I'm sure that it is also slowly creeping into the neoadjuvant domain as well. So as surgical oncologists, we are happy we are getting to operate on the scope of our surgery also hopefully broadens with the use of better agents.
So can I ask you a question, Dr. Krishnamurthy, that, you know, has someone really come to you in the sense and said, Doctor, even you have advised surgery, and then they have said, we have heard a lot about target therapy, immunotherapy. How have you ever heard that question from your patients, that can we try some target or immunotherapy in a early stage operable lung cancer?
Not really, but I think there have been options of, asked about non-surgical treatments, I must say.
So
although
SRS versus that is obviously
that debate comes, but then I'm sure that, but they still are asking for targeted therapy in the adjuvant setting. I think that has come, but neoadjuvant, not many queries. I think with the popularity of your panels and these talks, I guess, if somebody listens to it, I think they will definitely ask.
No. That is Vision 2020 October now. In October 2020, there should be one patient who comes 2021, one patient who comes to you and says target therapy, immunotherapy in lung cancer in neoadjuvant setting. Okay, let me go and talk to Dr. Chandrakant. Chandrakant, are you there? Dr. Chandrakant? Okay, Dr. P.N. Mahapatra?
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, so sir, what is the preferred modality of biomarker testing? I mean, do you do a single gene EGFR IL cross? Do you do a coupon NGS 5 gene panel? Do you do a lung cancer hotspot NGS? Or do you do a foundation medicine NGS? Or what is the how do you go about the biomarker testing in your clinical practice?
We are doing everything actually. It's all depends upon the turnover time actually. Okay. The ideal is actually if you do the EGFR, you have to do a RT-PCR and see EGFR and ISC of ALK and ROS, and then send the patient to NGS actually. But it's all depends upon sometimes we don't have in our hospital, we don't have the EGFR testing RT-PCR. So we are, if somebody is turnover time is around 10-11 days for any testing, we are sending them NGS also.
Okay. So by and large, sir, if I ask you out of 100 patients, how many would you get a NGS done? How many will get a single gene testing done? Just a broad ballpark figure, sir.
We are, as I told you, we are actually sending the patient for we are not doing artificial here actually.
No, sir. Fair enough, sir. So you're sending NGS for everyone, the 5 gene or the middle panel or the big panel?
All, actually, we are more keen on 5 gene actually because this is the gene of the medicines is available. Actually. Okay. And nowadays, actually, it's all depends upon nowadays is giving a coupon of 12 gene also. That also,
yeah, the coupon has now increased from 5 gene to 12 gene. The
That
paisa
also,
also has increased, sir, from 5 to 12
it is
G.
8,500 and it is cheaper than what they used to do. But that also
Okay.
is same.
Okay. Chandrakant, are you there?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, Chandrakant. So which one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which one?
Sir, we have EGFR on PCR, ALK, IHC, ROS, IHC.
Okay,
Majority.
ROS IHC. Okay, so you are going for the single gene testing about EGFR, ALK, and ROS.
Yes, sir. In majority, in those affording around 20% patients, I would do a hotspot NGS.
A hotspot. So either a number 1 or a number 3. No number 2, number 4. Fantastic. Dr. Joseph, I think you're unmuted now. What is the status in Sri Lanka?
So we do single gene testing for EGFR, ALK, and
ALK and
ROS.
ROS. And what is the approximate turnover time, sir?
So it's about 3 to 4 weeks, because between 2 to 4 weeks actually. Some
Okay.
of the
Okay. Let me go to the molecular pathologist in the house. So Dr. Amit, I'm sure you are going to frown upon us if we say single gene testing for EGFR, ALK, ROS. You are going to list us the 8 genes that we are going to miss if we do only EGFR, ALK, and ROS. So between the coupon 12 gene versus the hotspot versus foundation, what is the bare minimum that you think is okay for you? And what are the things that, Dr. Amit, I would again, I always ask this question to you in the panel, either when you are a moderator or when I am a moderator, how do we make out that the NGS report which has been sent, that all those things had been done? We are medical oncologists. Pathologist tells us it's adenocarcinoma. We believe it's adenocarcinoma. So what are the basic things you look for in an NGS panel? A quick, maybe 3 minutes.
The essential key genes should be tested: the EGFR, ALK, ROS, and PDL1.
Okay.
If you're talking about these 3 genes and plus the IHC, which is the PDL1. If you were to choose an NGS, then especially the NGS should cover the point mutation, which is the EGFR1. ALK and ROS are fusion alterations, so you have to categorically ask the lab, or you should figure out whether they do the fusion panels properly or not. Sometimes they tend to miss, which is a big miss. This is the key information which you have to choose actually. And then if you are looking for some rare alterations, if that is your aim, beyond the 5 gene panel or the hotspot, then you also should look whether the panel can do amplification tests like MET or the HER2 amplification. So if they are good enough for all these things, you should be confident them to write. If there is any doubt and affordability is not an issue, foundation becomes very handy. It's a no-brainy test. Just order it and you will get the answer.
Okay. So, I mean, again, there was a question, Dr. Amit, which asked about, can you please explain the hotspot and the foundation NGS? So for the general oncologist over here, what do we mean by the 5, and what are the things what should we look for? The depth, the coverage, the DNA, RNA, just to make sure that fine, this is the okay thing.
So when you say hotspot test, we have options like a small gene panel, a moderate gene panel, and a large gene panel. So when you talk about 5 gene panel, it is considered to be a small gene panel hotspot test. When you talk about a moderate gene panel, which is a 48 gene panel available commercially, and then we have something which is called 170 gene panel and above, which is a high or large gene panel hotspot. When it comes to the foundation, which is considered to be a comprehensive genomic profiling, where all the genes mentioned in their list includes the intron and the exons and the intron exon boundaries, which are very important. When you talk about the NGS 5 gene panel or the hotspot small, medium, or large gene panel, they tend to focus on these point mutations, that is the insertions and deletions. They may also look into the fact that few of the panels may look at the fact of the amplification, but majority of the hotspot misses the fusion panels. So on the other hand, comprehensive genomic test, the foundation, especially when they look at the splice site locations, as well as the intron exon boundaries and the various rare alterations which are required for the calling of the variants of the fusions, is very important. So again, 4 types of alterations: the point mutations, the insertion deletions, the amplification, and the fusion. There are limitations of each panel. So that is the bottom line actually.
Okay, so the take-home messages that I can get from Dr. Amit's small talk of 3 minutes is, first of all, when you get a report, talk to your molecular pathologist. Don't interpret everything alone. Talk to your molecular pathologist, give them a call. Other second thing is, if you want to look for mutations, look at the DNA, look at the insertions, deletions, point mutations, etc. If you want to look at the fusions, ask them whether an RNA testing has been done, which will basically look for ALK, ROS, NTRK and all, and ask them whether they do a MET amplification also, which is typically seen in MET. Is that right, Dr. Ahmed, what I'm trying to say?
Yes, you are right.
This is by and large the thumb rule, basically.
Chat discussion coming up by Dr. Purvish, and he's mentioning that hotspot test refers to testing only in the areas in the DNA exons. So that is true. And the foundation is the name of a laboratory, not a test. So the test is called comprehensive genomic profiling, which can be offered by any laboratory, whosoever does it. So the comprehensiveness is the exon, intron, and their boundaries.
Okay, let me just go through the next one. So rate the following markers to everybody, and I'll start with Dr. Let's take the surgeons and the radiation oncologist perspective. Dr. Arvind Krishnamurthy, I mean, EGFR ALK, must have, nice to have.
Yeah, I think definitely EGFR and ALK is now slowly moving to must have, even in across all stages, I must say.
Okay, I will come to that stages thing over there. Okay, fine. Dr. Costa, PDL1 must have, nice to have. I cannot hear Dr. Costa. Doesn't make a difference. Dr. Subhash Ranjan is there, sir? Dr. Subhash.
So Dr. Subhash will log in soon. Dr. Kaustav is there, sir.
Okay, Dr. Kaustav?
Yeah, Dr. Ullas, I think, yes. I mean, the way it's moving, EGFR, ALK is must have, PDL1 and ROS is very nice to have.
Okay.
Rest of the list, rest of it maybe could have, but even from radiation oncologist viewpoint, PDL1 is becoming more and more important. Stage 3 management. I think EGFR, ALK, PDL1, they are good to have. Yes.
Okay, fine. So let me ask Dr. Chandrakant and Dr. P.N. Mahapatra. So Dr. Chandrakant, exon 14 splicing mutation, BRAF, KRAS, NTRK, RET, must have, nice to have. Dr. Chandrakant? Okay. Dr. Mahapatra, sir?
We have the drugs actually. For BRAF, we have the drugs. For exon 14 splicing mutation, we have the drug. Maybe you in the future will be getting. We have the drugs available for KRAS mutations, but it's not available in India. But if somebody wants, just now one patient with colon cancer, they have a KRAS mutation. They told we can import the drug. I told it's not. It's not active in colon cancer, but it's you have to do. You may be doing now at least what is the drug available. In future you will be doing more.
Okay, so let me just, because we all spoke about, Dr. Arvind Krishnamurthy and Dr. Costa spoke about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So Dr. Arvind, I'll ask this first question to you. Stage 1, stage 2, will you do a EGFR, PDL1, ALK and ROS? Which one will your medical oncologist do, and how much do you frown?
I'm not, I don't frown, I must say, but we tried to sort of, do it only in the post-surgical setting as far as now. We are not
I'm talking about adjuvant setting. You have done your surgery. The patient has come, it's a T2N1M0. It's a node positive NSCLC. Your medical oncologist is asking to do EGFR, ALK, ROS, PDL1, everything. How much do you frown? Because my surgeon frowns at me when I do all these tests.
No, I think with the accumulation of evidence that, especially for the EGFR and ALK, so with the evidence, I think we must sort of give in and rather than frown. That's my take.
So you think in stage 1, stage 2, you will be absolutely okay in doing a EGFR and PDL1. That's what your take is.
Yeah, and you must have, the patients should be informed. There are options, and I think it is an informed decision, and the patient should be given that option,
Similarly, the option should be given to them that there is a non-surgical option also available.
Yeah, but
before
I'll come
doing
to that.
before doing our maths.
That's a huge debate. I'll come to that when you ask me, but
Okay.
not possibly within this half an hour. No?
I know. Dr. Kaustav tried to unmute himself when I was speaking about that. So, Dr. Kaustav, your take on that?
No. I think Dr. Arvind and I are great friends, so we'll not get into that. But yeah, coming to your question, stage 1 and stage 2, I think EGFR should be there.
Okay.
PDL1 definitely, I mean, not definitely, as Dr. Arvind said, informed consent, patient should be informed, but PDL1 has value. EGFR, ALK and PDL1 have value in stage 3 where a patient is undergoing concurrent chemoradiation, right?
Okay. Dr. Nuraj Joseph, what's the status in Sri Lanka? Are you doing EGFR, PDL1, ALK cross in the early stages?
We are not doing at the moment, but there is something to look at. It's a question of funding availability for TKIs in the adjuvant setting. So if we get to that point, then obviously we will consider testing.
And can I ask you, how is the, because I don't know the status of funding in Sri Lanka, is it government funded medicines or is it the patient, because in India, most of them are self-paying. So how the drugs and things done in Sri Lanka?
So we have both. Most of the patients are treated in the government sector and it is funded by the government. But of course, now PD and PD1 and PDL1 inhibitors aren't consistently available. There are periods where it's difficult, access is restricted. We do have TKIs, but again, there are periods when access is restricted. But if we start offering these in the adjuvant setting, I think cost is going to be an issue. So
cost is always an issue.
Yeah. So I think it's a question of what treatment options we have. And certainly if we are able to prescribe these drugs, then certainly we would consider testing.
Okay. So Chandrakant, stage 1, stage 2, which all tests do you do?
So early stage, I will definitely do EGFR.
So can I just stop? Can I just stop you for a second, Chandrakant? You look good to go to a Saturday night party. So that is my one comment on that. You can put on the TV. We can put on the video. Come on. Tell me now about EGFR ALK cross.
Sorry, sir. Sir, I think for EGFR, we have good data of osimertinib. So I would definitely do an EGFR. I would not do an ALK right now, even though you would say that ALK would work and ROS would work. I know you would say that next. And
No,
PDL1.
I'm not saying anything.
Okay. So PDL1 and EGFR, I will do, sir, in early stages, but not ALK and ROS at this point of time.
Okay. Dr. Amit, you will do an NGS for an early stage NSCLC?
Probably not.
Probably not. Finally, so if the molecular pathologist says that don't do an NGS for an early stage lung cancer, we will agree with everyone. So what my take on this is stage 1, stage 2, I will definitely do an EGFR and a PDL1. I'll come to the reasons hopefully in next 5 minutes. Let's go to stage 3. Let me start with Dr. Kaustav now. Dr. Kaustav, stage 3 following CTRT or following surgery. Do you, first of all, how many percentage of your patients actually take the durvalumab trial, the Pacific regime?
So in the type of practice and my colleague medical oncologists, my medical oncology team, I have seen quite a few patients taking durvalumab actually. But
is there a job available?
The city scenario in my
Dr.
hospital practice.
Is there a job available? Can I come? I'm making
no. So I mean, I have seen almost 15 to 20% patients in stage 3 take durvalumab actually, who have on concurrent CTRT, and they have completed those 12 cycles of durvalumab. That is 15 to 20% in our practice, but the city practice may just be 4 to 5%.
True that. Okay, and what about so will you do an EGFR or a PDL1 in stage 3 lung cancer?
Yeah.
Do you do?
Okay. I do means it is informed to the, basically I refer to the medical oncologist or vice versa, and it is discussed with the patient. The medical oncologist discusses with the patient, and PDL1 I think is going to stay in stage 3. It's here to.
Okay. Dr. Arvind, what is your take of EGFR, PDL1, ALK cross in stage 3 post surgeries? Let's say at stage 3A.
I think higher the stage, believe the benefit of some of these agents seems to be slightly much more, especially of the osimertinib. So I think theoretically, of course, we'll be more inclined to sort of do the testing, especially in the higher stages. But I would say that, you know, in real world, in our practices, the number of patients who actually take osimertinib or durvalumab is hardly a handful. So those are again exactly the costs and all the logistics come into play.
I am not applying for a job at your center. I am going to apply a job for at Dr. Arvind Krishnamurthy Center and not at your center. Okay, Chandrakant and or Dr. Mahapatra first. Sir, EGFR PD-L1 in a stage 3 lung cancer. Yes or no, sir?
Actually, if you are doing a surgery, then you need a EGFR. PD-L1 actually, if you see the durvalumab trial, if it is its PD-L1 is actually not required. Irrespective of PD-L1, you have to give the durvalumab. So we don't do PD-L1.
Fair enough, sir. Chandrakant?
Sir, I believe that if PD-L1 is negative, I wouldn't force them for durvalumab.
Okay. So fair enough. So you will do, but you will do a PD-L1 EGFR probably,
Yes,
and you will then decide about how further to go.
Correct.
Fair enough.
Correct, sir.
Now let me go to the NACT setting. I'm going to give you my comments about this in the end. What about the NACT setting, Dr. Arvind? Now let's hear the medical oncologist first. So let's say it's a CT3N1M0. Dr. Arvind, patient has come to you. Dr. Arvind has referred the patient to you for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Would you only give neoadjuvant chemotherapy? It's a 62-year-old non-smoking female. Will you do an EGFR PD-L1 for that lady? Or ALK-ROS? So, Chandrakant.
Yes, sir. I mean, that's a very effective question. You know, I would do all the target mutations for this patient because a lady would have a driver mutation, and why not? I would use a neoadjuvant targeted therapy than a chemotherapy for this patient.
Okay. So NACT, you will do EGFR, PD-L1, ALK-ROS, all four. You would want to say yes. Although the data is sparse right now. I would agree on the data is sparse. I'm putting in a difficult situation.
Yes, sir. So I would do all four, sir. What I will then discuss what needs to be done later as per the standard, but I would do all four because I will understand what best I can give to this patient.
Fair enough. So Dr. Arvind, how comfortable are you? So what is the intent of medical oncologists? So when do you refer a patient for neoadjuvant chemotherapy, Dr. Arvind?
Theoretically, at least any tumor more than 4 centimeters or N plus, even in early stages, like for example, of course, T4 becomes 4 centimeters becomes T2. Theoretically, you can give neoadjuvant chemotherapy for these set of patients. Of course, in any N2 setting, you would give or in selected settings in which you would want to consider surgery, like for non-bulky mediastinal nodes in which you are contemplating some form of surgical treatment. So though that would be the bulk of the patients, but theoretically more than 4 centimeters or any N plus disease, you can give neoadjuvant.
Okay. So this was what I thought as an answers for all these things, and this is here. So stage 1 and 2 EGFR definitely yes. PD-L1 maybe, ALK-ROS actually I wouldn't maybe, but I would have said no. Stage 3 following CTRT definitely yes for EGFR, maybe for PD-L1, ALK and ROS probably yes because we have got a clinical trial going on right now in which we may give alectinib or ROS may crizotinib to these people. In NACT setting, I am more of a conservative management. I don't give neoadjuvant TKI, Chandrakant. The reason behind that only is I don't know when to stop. I don't know how much to give. So let's say I've given, so this is a problem which I had actually. I've given alectinib to a person who was just not responding. She responded so well. Now adjuvant, what do I do? So I didn't know. So when I don't know anything, I don't start. I don't even start the discussion over there with the patient. So I don't usually give.
So the intent of NACT is response, no, sir? So
yeah, sure. So I totally agree with your point, Chandrakant, that the response rate of a ALK TKI to a ALK non-small cell lung cancer is absolutely more than what a conventional chemotherapy is. But the trials, the CTOM trial, the ADAURA trial, the Empower trials have shown In adjuvant setting and neoadjuvant setting, the TKIs and immunotherapy are more static drugs. They're not sidal drugs. You need to have a particular duration. Otherwise, you will land up into more issues. Having said that, this is my issue. I'm sure if Dr. Kumar Prabhash was this over there, he will give TKIs to everyone.
What about a chemo TKI combination, sir?
So Kumar can give. I won't give. Dr. Kumar is Kumar Prabhash. No, he can give. I have to face a lot of medical litigation, so I won't give. Stage 4, I'm sure that we all will give all these things. So this is what exactly I thought about when I had prepared this question. Now let's go to about status of liquid biopsies. Dr. Amit Verma, you have been sitting idle for a long time. So what do you think is the status of liquid biopsy currently in lung cancer? And again, what is it right now? And where do you see liquid biopsy in 2025?
So the first question is, what is the current status? I think we all are using liquid biopsy in a scenario when the biopsy is not possible. The next question is, what is the future? Will it be a first-line modality? The answer is probably yes. Right now, we are able to do the standard EGFR testing for the key important alterations, the DEL19 deletions, as well as the L858R or T790M. As the scope of the liquid biopsy increases to harbor or encompassing other genetic alterations, like the important one, including the ALK and ROS fusions, as well as the MET, in that case, the liquid biopsy will supersede the biopsy, especially. And also, the future may talk about the doing the liquid biopsy and the solid biopsy together. So it would be a complementary test rather than a test which is replacing each other. So that is the future, yeah.
So fantastic answer, Dr. Amit. I mean, and my whenever I have to give a talk on liquid biopsy, I always say a liquid biopsy will not replace tissue biopsy, but they will be going hand in hand with each other. And whether, and again, I was a big critic of liquid biopsy when it came into our institute, but I have only one word to say about, one sentence to say about liquid biopsy. And it's like, you know, you may like it, you may hate it, but you can't ignore it. Liquid biopsy is here to stay. And even ISCLC is now even actually going in for liquid biopsy first. And when liquid biopsy, again, there's a lot of myths along with that. We're not talking about a single gene EGFR testing. Liquid biopsy NGS is something which is being spoken about now. And we have patients who have refused tissue biopsy and who are on liquid biopsy, and we are going over there. So stage 1 lung cancer, I'll come to Adora. I think we have only 3 minutes. But before that, I will come to Dr. Arvind and Dr. Kaustav. What is your take? Which patient in stage 1 or stage 2 lung cancer will you, Dr. Arvind, refer to a medically fit patient? Will you refer to Dr. Kaustav for SBRT? And Dr. Kaustav, vice versa, which patient has come to you? Which patient in stage 1, stage 2, medically absolutely fit, you will send for surgery? Let me start with Dr. Arvind now.
Medically fit, I think 100% I'll operate.
Kaustav is your dear friend. He said he is your dear friend.
No, I'm sure there are enough and more medically unfit patients for now. I think Kaustav can manage, but I think there is compelling evidence in the form of whatever. I think a lot of meta-analysis, a lot of propensity match, everything. Even very latest meta-analysis and propensity matched, all saying regular surgeries are better. But anyway, I'll let Kaustav speak, and then I can.
So I can tell you one answer prior to that. Whenever these kind of cases are discussed in a tumor board, it is always post-surgery. I always ask my surgeon, he said, no, I have already operated. So there is no surgically unfit patient as far as the surgeons are concerned. So Dr. Kaustav, your take on this.
So what has happened, Dr. Ullas, I think guideline-wise, Arvind is absolutely correct. Currently, level 1 evidence is for surgery for medically fit patient. That is the strongest evidence. We know that STARS and ROSELL's two group of, the European as well as the Amsterdam group as well as the US group, they tried to pool tests and it was radiation did wonderful. But I don't know whether Dr. Arvind tweaked it or not. He told the surgeon not to refer enough patients for those studies. So the equipment was very less and the results were inadequate. So that is why the STARS and ROSELL could not withstand the test of time, and level 1 is for surgery. I agree to that.
Oh my God. I mean, level 1 for stage 1, stage 2 surgery. Then we have a lung art trial coming up in which, there is no role of post-op RT. Difficult being a radiation oncologist in today's panel, Dr. Kaustav.
Ullas, just one another point I must say. There is also compelling evidence to say that surgery in fit octogenarians also, we have evidence in the annals a couple of months back that they do better. Also, there is also evidence that delayed surgery is better than early SBRT, and this is important in the realm of the COVID pandemic.
I'm only talking about the medically fit group, not the medically.
Yeah, I agree. It's a medically
fit.
So he's just trying to put the nail in the coffin, okay?
Can I just add something here? So in Sri Lanka, we practice radiation and medical oncology together. So we have that advantage. We are clinical oncologists, basically. I think I agree that. So I think when the evidence precedes, I mean, the evidence for surgery predated SBRT. So obviously, it's now you need a trial to prove equivalence or superiority. That's going to be difficult to recruit. We saw a similar situation in bladder cancer. But I think now the evidence is sufficient where the patient should have a discussion. I mean, both options should be discussed with the patient, and we should offer both options with the limitations and evidence. And I think both should be put. And in Sri Lanka, we try to have multidisciplinary meetings. So I think these patients should be seen by a surgeon, thoracic surgeon who does lung cancer surgery, as well as a clinical oncologist. And ideally, the decision should be arrived after that. That is my opinion on that.
I think that's a fantastic point that you made, Dr. Joseph. It's a patient who should be very, very much informed as a part of that discussion, and both the options should be given to them as that. And I think with that, I have almost finished my time. It was a lovely discussion, and I would just like to conclude by saying, hope is there in lung cancer. And it's very exciting times to be a thoracic oncologist, I will say, not a medical oncologist, because the more and more people are getting living longer. We have a data which says, last year was the highest number of follow-up of lung cancer patients that we have seen in the last 3 to 4 years. People are living more now, and that's a fantastic thing to have. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you, for a fantastic discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ullas, and all the panelists for this wonderful and lively discussion. As usual, there are lots of points that remain unanswered because of the peculiarities of the real world. In the chat and the question and answers, there were a lot of questions on NGS. And anticipating that, we have none other than Dr. Mehboob Basade, Senior Medical Oncologist from Mumbai, to tell us about molecular analysis in lung cancer with NGS. Dr. Mehboob, all of us are eagerly waiting to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, sir, and thank you very much for inviting me over here. Hope you are able to listen to me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So I'm sharing my slides. So there were a lot of questions about the NGS, which were already a question, and you got an answer also in many of them. So I will just put forth some of my views regarding how we are going to do the NGS in the lung cancer and why it is important to do the NGS. Okay, so we have now we have gone in the lung cancer management right from the chemotherapy, when Dr. Purvish Parikh and Dr. Advani sir will remember, we were treating all the patients of lung cancers initially with cisplatin and etoposide. Those were the days. From there, we have moved to the targeted therapies like EGFR gene mutations and ALK and ROS, and the latest kid on the block is the MET exon 14 skipping gene. So these are the all various genetic mutations which are targetable, and there are some treatment options available for such targets. So that those are very important from the patient's management point of view. So why do we really need biomarker? We already had discussion in the panel regarding this, because if there is a biomarker and if the drugs are available, that will be a really precise medicine for that patient, which will avoid any harm, whether it's a financial toxicity or really bodily toxicity to the patient, and the survival will also improve if you treat them properly. And this is a really nice slide to know that if you have a targetable mutation, which is the driver mutation, and if you have a targetable therapy against such driver mutation, the survival is the best as compared to the patients who have no oncogenic driver mutations, or there are oncogenic driver mutations are identified, but there is no treatment available yet. So compared to that, the patients who have a targeted, who receive the targeted therapy will do very well. So what are the markers? And Ullas has already discussed about all these markers and how we should do them. That we will discuss a little bit about over here. As far as EGFR mutations are concerned, we can do the PCR, we can do by NGS, or we can do even Sanger-based testing. As far as ALK and ROS is concerned, they are done by IHC or FISH. But there are other, like BRAF mutations can be done by PCR or by NGS. NTRK can be done by FISH, IHC, PCR, NGS. RET, MET can also be done. They can be done only by the NGS testing. And while we know that the PD-L1 is a protein expression which can be tested by an IHC. So there are variety of the combination of the testings which have to do it. So right now, what we are recommending as a core testing for a panel which Ullas started. So we do that EGFR mutation, ALK, ROS, BRAF, NTRK, MET exon 14 skippings, RET gene fusions, and the PDL expression, provided financially patient is affordable for all these things, or otherwise I go by the previous core testing, the block that is EGFR, ALK, ROS, and PDL1 expression for that. In future, we may be also doing the KRAS, NRG1 mutations or MET amplifications, or other driver mutations may also come into the feature. So how to do that, and what are the next generation sequencing and the other methods to find out the genetic alterations or mutations and the molecular targets which are available. So if you know a specific mutation like EGFR mutations or BRAF or MET, where there is a point mutation, you can do either by PCR or you can do even by the NGS. But doing by PCR, it is a highly sensitive, specific, rapid, easy to use, and cheaper. But it can detect only pre-prescribed the mutations. So that's an important disadvantage. But if you are doing an NGS, you can do either whole genome sequencing or whole exome sequencing, which is a time consuming. The turnaround time is usually 2 to 3 weeks. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. It has a lower sensitivity. It needs a high infrastructure, but it can detect variety of targets and the alterations simultaneously. It can also detect the tumor mutation burden, which cannot be detected by any other method. So that is also an important mechanism, the important test to know that what we are going to treat such patients if TMB is high. We can do the FISH, frozen in situ hybridization technique. Again, turnaround time is very quick, 2 to 3 days, and it is used either for ALK, ROS, or RET. IHC is probably the cheapest one among the all, and majority of the institutions in Mumbai and around in India are doing it, and we are using for PDL1, ALK, and ROS. So none of the method is scoring over the another. We have to go and add and do the combination for each and every molecular target what we are going to achieve in the lung cancer. So if we are doing by the next generation sequencing, and this is the diagram which we know that how it is done. I don't want to go much in detail here because this August gathering of oncologists, everybody is aware. Ultimately, it is the software which maps, aligns, and it gives us the idea. It gives us what kind of the genetic alteration or molecular alterations are seen in the patients of the lung cancer. But how it scores as compared to PCR. So if you compare with the PCR, the technology wise, if you see there are PCR primers which are specific to mutations are used in the PCR, while in NGS it is sequence by synthesis we are doing it. As I earlier mentioned to you, the turnaround time for the NGS is quite high. It's almost for 14 days or 2 weeks, while PCR can be done even, and there are some labs in Mumbai, they say that we will give within 24 hours the EGFR mutation report also. Tumor mutation burden cannot be detected by the PCR method, while it can be detected by the and it can be detected by the NGS. But if you are looking for an EGFR mutation coverage, and there was a question about the hotspot mutations, PCR can detect 10 to 25 hotspots, while the NGS can detect all hotspot as well as non-hotspot mutations. Advantage of PCR is rapid, cheaper, but disadvantage is that only prescribed mutations or known mutations for which the primers are available can be done and can be used, and as compared to NGS, which can detect the non-hotspot mutations as well as, but it is expensive and it takes a lot of time. So whether you will go, as Ullas was asking, whether you want to have a comprehensive foundation testing or you want to go by the more specific targeted testing, depends on in which area you are working. If you are working in a smaller institution or private best practice, then one can go for the targeted therapies, because it has some advantages that, you know, there are standardized platforms available, they are cheap, they are highly sensitive, reduced turnaround time, and they do not require too much of tumor material. But if you are sitting in a large comprehensive institute of cancer institute where there is an academic wing, then probably you will have to go by the NGS, because it provides a lot of data for research, as well as you can get the tumor evolution, you can have other biomarkers for the other as well as new existing therapies. You can also learn the resistance mechanisms through the NGS pathways. So these are very important ways, and there is an article published way back in 2017 saying that NGS provides more comprehensive testing for mutations as compared to the FDA approved kits which are commercially available. So NGS has its own place. Nobody is replacing, the PCR is not getting replaced by the NGS, but they are all complementary. But it depends on the time, it depends on the institution where you are working and all. So it's more recommends that you should do the multi-gene NGS in non-small cell lung cancer. But if you are in clinical research, then you can do the high-end NGS, but otherwise in the academic institutions. But otherwise, if the patient is the pair, the doctor and the patient can decide together to lower the cost and to have a meaningful genetic alterations and their treatment options available, so that one can go by even the IHC combination, PCR combination also for such patients. So there are different sequencing like whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing, or one can go for the targeted gene panel. We already discussed about the targeted gene panel, as it costs less, but rapid interpretation is available, easy to use for the clinical. While at the other end, you have a whole genome sequencing, which is the highest resolution of genomic alterations. It requires highly skilled manpower. It is expensive, and there is so much of data that it is very difficult for a clinician to interpret. You will require few experts in the bioinformatics also to read out the data, but it may be more of, apart from the clinical significant treatment, from the treatment point of view, also a research point of view, it will be an important addition. While whole exome sequencing is a gold standard for academic setting with the large comprehensive cancer centers, mostly in the US. And this is one article which I took it from the Ullas Batras, which is published. What they have done is almost 100 patients sample were collected and subjected to NGS. What they could found that targetable mutation was seen in almost 34 patients, while 52 other patients harbored the non-actionable mutations. But by doing an NGS, they also found that if there are co-mutation associated with the established EGFR mutation, the survival of such patients is lower as compared to the patients who do not harbor any co-mutations. And there is a concordance which is there as compared to NGS. So this is my last slide. So what I would say that if you are having a small tissue and you are in a private setup, then when you can go for a single gene assays which are demanding in terms of the tissue and time, because it is a rapid. The next generation sequencing techniques can be used especially in the larger institutions, where not only the therapeutic benefit as well as for the research benefit also can be acquired, and that NGS will provide you the mutational portrait of all the tumors which have low tumor fractions. You will get an additional TMB which cannot be detected by the PCR. As an oncologist, I know that we have limitation in having our knowledge more into the genomic sequencing and other things. So you should be always be in contact with the laboratory person and to know exactly what's happening from them. And the laboratory people, they also make us aware that different technique being, when they are used, the results may be different. So these are the various important factors one should remember. And that's how the genetic sequencing and the tumor mutation analysis of the lung cancer can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mehboob. That was a fantastic conclusion to how to use NGS and what are the advantages and disadvantages of each factor. As we all know, the survival of lung cancer has increased from 6 months to a significant number of people surviving as many as 5 years. And I think this is because we are doing personalized therapy. And one of the important things to do that is to look at uncommon mutations in non-small cell lung cancer and then decide how to treat this patient. So we have none other than Dr. Suresh Advani, the senior most oncologist from India, to tell us what is the real world scenario and how do we manage uncommon EGFR mutations. So Dr. Advani sir, over to you.
Dear friends, the first of all of us know, and we have realized from our practice that the common mutation respond very well. And you get a little bit upset when you get the report with an uncommon mutation. And that is, the reason is that the response to the various agents become very poor. That's very well known. The one thing which is not really very clear, which TKI are better in which mutation. That there have been a lot of controversy on that, but all of us know that in general, uncommon mutation, EGFR mutation do poorly. Next slide. If you look at the whole analysis, it's quite clear that 85% of EGFR mutation are common mutation. And they respond as commonly experienced by all of us, how we use the first generation, second generation, and third generation agents. But 10 to 15% are uncommon mutation. Also, we have seen some of the compound mutation. That means more than 2 mutation. 2 or more than 2 mutation when they coexist. Next slide. And over a period of time, you can see that how it has become very clear now. And you get a good lab information from the laboratory, the location of various uncommon EGFR mutation. You can see over here that exon number 18, there are 3 mutations. Exon number 19, there's 2, and also exon number 20, there are 2, and similarly exon number 21, there are 2 mutation. Now some of them are either point mutation or some of them are insertion and deletion mutation. And again, individually, each one of them, how it is going to respond to which TKI it will respond is it's not possible, because as the numbers are not sufficient enough to tell us and guide us with regard to that. Next slide. The one thing which we would like to, everybody likes to know, is what is the definition of this common and uncommon mutation. So there are various factors which have been jotted down in this slide. Next slide. But ultimately, the important thing is, how do we choose the TKI from a battery of TKI for uncommon EGFR mutation? That is what we are going to see the data. Next slide. I think first of all, we have to have a preclinical evidence. That means in vitro cell lines showing the uncommon mutation versus the cell lines which shows the common mutation. Next slide. And you can see over here that the response is best in terms of uncommon EGFR mutation with the afatinib. You can clearly see the slide on the part of the slide on the left side that how afatinib can have a major kill. Also, with regard to the afatinib, it is effect is equal when it is activity against the cell line harboring the uncommon mutation, whereas the response to afatinib is similar across all the cell lines. Next slide. Also, the sensitivity of TKI to various EGFR mutation by the MANO methodology clearly again shows that how the afatinib is sensitive in most of the uncommon and compound EGFR mutation compared to the first and second generation. So it becomes little obvious that the second generation somehow or other are better than the first and the third generation in terms of sensitivity to TKI. Next slide. Following this evidence of in vitro evidence, we can also see the clinical evidence with the tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Next slide. And it is clear that the first generation TKI, they show very poor results with uncommon EGFR mutation. That's across any of these first generation TKI, that they have poor results in terms of the progression-free survival as well as in terms of overall survival. Next slide. With respect to the first generation and second generation TKI, progression-free survival is definitely better with the second generation. And you can clearly see that whether it is an entire uncommon mutation put together or whether you put only the major uncommon mutations together, you will find that second generation are definitely superior to the first generation. Next slide. I think this type of the overall survival also, you can again see that how the progression-free survival and overall survival is superior with the second generation. Next slide. With respect to the osimertinib phase 2 open label trial have shown that the response to the uncommon EGFR mutation is not really up to the mark. Next slide. All these afatinib lung clinical trial have shown that in almost every place there are about 11% to 18% number of overall frequency of uncommon mutation. Next slide. And if you put them together then and analyze them, it is quite again clear that the point mutation or duplication in exon 18 to 21, the response is inferior as compared to the group 2, the de novo 790 mutation. Next slide. Afatinib response in the Lux lung trial also shows the overall progression-free survival and overall response rate better with afatinib. Next slide. I think the comparison of first generation versus second generation versus the third generation, the progression-free survival and overall survival also shows that the second generation or little better as compared to the first and the third generation. Next slide. In the real world data with uncommon epidermal growth factor receptor mutation treated with afatinib, a large number of, next slide, cases have been put together. You can see here is almost 693 patients with 98 different uncommon mutations. Next slide. And the TKI naive are about 65%. Next slide. And TKI naive patients, the major uncommon mutation and compound mutation, there's no difference. Next slide. But what is important is to see that the major uncommon and compound mutation, the sensitivity is different, not to a great extent. Next slide. Time to the treatment failure by ethnicity is again little different. Like seems that the Asian seems to do better as compared to the non-Asian in every way. Next slide. And the response with afatinib from the pool analysis also clearly shows that the major uncommon and compound mutation show a strong activity in terms of overall response rate. And exon 20 insertion, afatinib demonstrated durable response, at least in some patients. Next slide. I think all this information, which is still being collected, and one can get from the website this information. But what we need to do is to really put these patients together and try and see how and which TKI we should prefer in different type of the EGFR mutation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Advani. This was a very good summary and overview of how we manage uncommon mutations. And you would agree that the journey for non-small cell lung cancer has been really dramatic and satisfying over the last 20 to 25 years. I remember as a student, you used to teach us that the median survival of metastatic non-small cell lung cancer was only 6 to 8 months. And now we are talking about 20% 5-year survival. And we have so many biomarkers and molecular tests that can actually tell us which patient is to be treated with which of the various druggable, targetable mutations and the markers that we have. In fact, I must also share with you the next conference that Dr. Advani is doing is on cancer patients who have unusually good responses. And I think as we learn more and more about how the mutations are driving the tumors and how we can, neutralize or circumvent the driver mutations, we are getting more and more survival, not only in lung cancer, in breast cancer and other cancers as well. So while concluding this non-small cell lung cancer webinar, I also invite all of you to participate in the unusual better responses conference that we will do in the near future. With these few words, I thank you very much and hand over back to Dr. Advani for his final comments as the program director. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think we had a very lovely discussion, and all the experts and the panel members have really clearly shown how we are trying to understand more, and in order that ultimately we should be able to give the precision oncology. That means the response should be the best with a particular drug in a different individual, so-called personalized treatment. So I think with the hope that in future we'll have a better understanding, I would like to thank each one of you for such a cohesive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And good night to everybody. Special thanks to Nurad Joseph, clinical oncologist from Sri Lanka, for joining us as a esteemed faculty and providing his expertise as well. Also Amit Verma, Arvind Krishnamurthy, and Niranjan Prabhu, who are still logged in. All of you, please stay safe. We are still in the COVID pandemic, and have a good evening, and hope to see you in one of the future webinars or face-to-face conferences. Good night and
Thank
take
you.
care.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.